For as long as there have been stories of adventure, there has been the mysterious loner, the Japanese ronin wandering in search of lost honor, the medieval knight without an order, the man with no name walking the streets of a dusty western town with a silver gun and a black hat. When Jack Reacher sat in that diner 23 years ago on the pages of Lee Child's debut novel, The Killing Floor, the world had a new version of this archetype, one that spoke to millions of viewers. Jack Reacher was the man we all needed to balance the scales of justice when our institutions had failed us. Over 24 books, Lee Child unleashed the 6'5", 250-pound unstoppable force on all manner of villains, righting wrongs across America and beyond. With The Sentinel, the 25th novel in the series, Lee Child ensures Reacher will be around for many years to come as he passes the baton to his brother Andrew Child. This thrilling entry, co-authored by the two brothers, takes Reacher to Pleasantville, Tennessee. And when the wrong people cross paths with Reacher, they find there's nothing pleasant about it.
Well, it is my honor to welcome Lee Child and Andrew Child to the Crew Reviews. Welcome, guys.
Hey, thank you.
How are you, gentlemen? Cheers.
So, Lee, I must start with you. So, for anyone who has not been hiding out in a remote cave without internet and maybe missed the news, you are transitioning into retirement from the Reacher series. First, you're going to collaborate with you have collaborated with your brother, and then you're going to hand it off to the one guy you know you can trust. Can you tell us, A, how you knew it was time, and B, how you knew it had to be Andrew?
Well, yeah, I mean, when I started out writing, everything I write is basically based on how I feel as a reader. And, having read all my life, you do become aware that at a certain point, authors start phoning it in. And so I made myself a promise, and by implication, the readers a promise, that I would never, ever phone it in. And I've kept that promise, I feel, for 24 books. And, but then I started to kind of feel, it's a bit like your car, suppose you got a car that you've had for a number of years and you really like it and so on, but it starts to make a weird noise or it goes a bit strange. And you think, oh God, I'll have to get a new car next year. Or maybe I could get another 2 years out of it, maybe 3 if I'm lucky. But the point is, it has entered your brain that at some point, the end is in sight. And I was getting to that stage. I thought, I cannot keep this up any longer. I've done it for 25 years. I'm an old guy. Sooner or later, I'm going to run out of gas and ideas. And I did not want to let the readers down. So it was a question of stopping the series, really. Except that in itself, that would be letting the readers down. Over the years, they've grown really fond of Reacher. They really like the guy. They want more. And I've always been conscious. In the very early years, it was about a financial contract. I needed to make a living. Happily, that was taken care of pretty soon. And then it became an emotional contract with the readers. They want the books. I must not let them down. And to stop the series would be letting them down. They would be really upset about it. So I had this kind of, what was really at the time, a kind of harebrained fantasy that, wouldn't it be great if I could wake up tomorrow morning 15 years younger, with all the energy and the ideas and the passion that I used to have 15 years ago. And yeah, I thought that was a sweet daydream, but then I thought, wait a minute. If I asked Andrew to do it, that would be exactly the same thing, because we are not exactly the same person, but we're pretty damn close. Obviously related DNA-wise, related in terms of our experiences, also in terms of our tastes. And it's really important for people to remember that this is not like a big surprise to Andrew, oh, who is Reacher? I mean, Andrew's lived with Reacher from the start because we're brothers. Just like I lived with his characters, Dave Trevelyan, Cooper Devereaux. I love those guys. We're sort of into each other's stuff. So I felt it would be difficult, but not impossible for him to jump in at this point. And I remember developing this crazy idea, and we were driving down to Denver from where we live in Wyoming through the most horrendous blizzard. And I think I waited till he was driving on the way back, and I said, how would you feel if I faded away and you took over the Reacher franchise? And it was a huge question for me and for him. You know, for me, it meant that I would be getting, as a reader, fewer of his books. If his time is taken up writing Reacher, I won't be able to read his stuff, which would have been a disappointment. And for him, you know, dramatic change of lane, jumping from his stuff to mine. But I asked him, sort of, you know, heart in my mouth, what did he think? And happily he said, yeah, because I wouldn't have done it with anybody else. I mean, it's just virtually impossible to take over a series unless you're really close to it for years and really close to the author for years. So he was really the only guy I would trust to do it. And on that blizzardy night, he said, yeah. And so here we are with the first.
Well, that's a good, let me have Andrew jump in here. So Andrew, if there's anything that he left out of the conversation that's pertinent to you, but also I want to know what went into your calculus when you were deciding whether to take on that mantle.
Yeah, well, you know, that's a really good question. And, you know, everything that Lee said was absolutely correct. We were, the surprising thing about it, though, was the reason we were going to Denver was it was actually the launch of one of my janitor books. So all I was thinking about was that event. It hadn't crossed my mind that anything else would come up in the conversation. So, you know how it is going into a book event. On the way to it, you know, you're kind of a little on edge because it's almost like a bit of a performance. You know, you're hoping that you're going to sound coherent and you're not going to make a fool of yourself, and that you're going to, you know, get some good questions, get some good answers. So, you know, I was really focused on that heading into the event. And then when the event's finished, you're kind of all happy and relaxed because it's done. But still, the only thing in my mind really was the fact that we were in the season for launching that book. So driving back through this horrendous weather, when Lee asked, I mean, I was absolutely taken aback. I was astonished because, first of all, you know, Reacher is such an incredible creation. So if you're the person who has made that creation, being prepared to put that in someone else's hands, you know, put his legacy in someone else's hands, I just felt, you know, I was lost for words really for a while. And then, you know, it moves into the more kind of practical considerations because, you know, I think most authors somewhere in the back of their minds, they're driven by, you know, every time they write something, they're hoping that it's good. They're hoping that they're not making a fool of themselves. They're hoping that they're not embarrassing themselves or letting anybody down. So, you know, part of me was thinking, well, you know, there's an enormous legion of Reacher fans out there, and I wouldn't want to let them down. So the question was, well, you know, could I do it? Was I up to the job? But then I think the key part really taps into another thing Lee was saying. It was about that emotional contract with the readers, because first and foremost, you know, I am a Reacher fan. I was the first person to read Killing Floor all those years ago. And cool. You know, I've lived with Reacher ever since. I remember very clearly the experience of reading Killing Floor because I was working for a telecom company in the UK, and Lee was out of work, you know, writing this book that was his lifeline, you know, it was the only thing that was going to put food on his family's table. Yeah. And, you know, I was a huge thriller fan, you know, I had been for years. So when he let me see this early copy, I was thinking, well, what if it's terrible? You know, what if it's no good? First of all, the implications for him and his family are horrendous. And then I'm going to have to tell him. So, you know, I was horrified, you know, by reading it. But, you know, one of the most remarkable things about Killing Floor, as you know, is that it's written in the first person, so you're seeing it through Reacher's eyes. And the way the action unfolds, Reacher gets arrested in the diner and dragged off to the police station, and after a while starts getting questioned by the detectives. The way it works is that you don't find out Reacher's name for ages. And the funny thing was, long before I knew Reacher's name, I knew Reacher, because as Lee said, we're brothers, we think the same, we act the same, we respond to things the same. So I was there with Reacher every step of the way, even before I knew he was called Jack Reacher. And it's gone on like that, every book since then. And, every now and again, there would be a thing where, another publisher would try to market one of their authors by saying, such and such, it's such and such as characters, the new Reacher. So I'd always read those books. And I'd think, no, he's not, because Reacher wouldn't have done this, and Reacher wouldn't have allowed that, and Reacher would never have got into the, so we'd always talk about it. And so, knowing, that sort of DNA level understanding of Reacher, I think, is the key. And beyond that, there were questions about, the way that Lee writes, because that was a bit different from the way that I would write. And, it was just a question of, it was a huge challenge. And, I thought about it and I thought, you know what? This is another thing. I always love a cliche, because most cliches are based on something that's absolutely true. And I remember when I first started writing, when I was considering whether to quit my job in telecoms or not, I remember somebody said to me that the saddest words in the English language are "what if," and so all those years ago, I was thinking, I don't want to get to the end of my life, my career, and look back and say, well, what if I tried writing a book, So then it was the same kind of thing. I thought, it could be a complete horrendous disaster, but I've got to try. I'd rather try and fail than not try
for
at
sure.
all.
But I can't look at this. Andrew, I'm glad you tried, and you have quite a track record as an author on your own. You got 9 books, 3 series, standalone among them, and you got co-authoring. Cat would get out of the way. The Sentinel with your brother. In that time, you alluded to it. You've developed your own unique voice and writing style. So how do you adjust your style to this iconic series?
Well, it was, in a way, it was a very strange thing to do, because right since my first book, something that's always been in the back of my mind is, because, as Lee will tell you, I'm probably the most stubborn, obstinate person you'll ever meet. And, I'm always, I think it's because, I was the youngest of 4, and by the time I came along, the other 3 were, all off, they're doing their own thing, they're independent. So, I kind of, my parents, I think they'd sort of said, oh, well, we've done this 3 times already, do we have to do it again? So I was very, very used to being independent, doing everything on my own. And in that kind of younger sibling way, I kind of resented it when one of the older brothers would come and say, oh, no, you're doing it wrong, you're supposed to do it like this. Even if it was wrong, I didn't care. I'd still want to do it my own way. And so when I decided I wanted to write, the last thing I wanted was really for people to be saying, oh, it's just like his brother. I wanted it to sound, I wanted it to have my own voice. But the problem is, it's one of those kind of weird philosophical questions, isn't it? If you are trying not to be influenced by something, then the very fact that you're trying to be different means that you are really still being influenced by it.
Yeah.
So for 9 books, I was making this real conscious effort not to sound too much like Lee Child. So then it was kind of strange, because I thought, oh, well, that's okay. Then it's a bit like, I've been riding a bike with the brakes on, all I've got to do is take the brakes off and I'll be fine. But actually, it wasn't quite like that at all, because things like riding are very habit forming. So, I had to work quite hard on adjusting so that the bits that we did, sounded homogenous, and it didn't sound like, you had 2 completely different voices there. So, it was, and the thing is, even though it took me a while to adjust to doing it, I knew from the outset what I had to do. And, I'd been trying so hard for so long to avoid it that I kind of knew what it was that I was aiming for. So I hope we got there. I hope we did a good job of that.
Yeah, I mean, as creators ourselves, we all know how much our babies mean to us. Lee, were there any challenges for you in letting go enough to give Andrew room to create?
Well, my philosophy, again, based on being a reader and having read so much all my life, there's a danger for a series writer, and which has been repeated over and over again, I think, where the author falls in love with the character. I think you can kind of see that in almost any series. There's a point at which the author just loves the character. I mean, you can see it with Thomas Harris, I think. Silence of the Lambs. Well, Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs were just a great pair of books about Hannibal Lecter. And if you look at Silence of the Lambs as a book, Hannibal Lecter is okay. He is a psychopathic cannibal. But if you get past that, he is an exceptionally well-drawn character, a provincial middle-class guy from Baltimore who's on the board of the local symphony and this and that. It's a very, very convincing picture of a real life. Then we went 9 years till his next book, during which time he totally fell in love with the characters. So that the next book, the one where he's in Italy and they're trying to capture him and feed him to the pigs. I can't remember what the title was. Hannibal, was it? In those 9 years, Harris had fallen in love with him to the extent that Hannibal he could speak Renaissance Italian better than the Italian scholars. He was the world's biggest wine expert. He's a psychiatrist, so he has an MD probably 25 years ago, but now he can do brain surgery on living patients. Mm-hmm. It just became ludicrous because the author fell in love with the character. Mm. So I was always aware of that. And my personal approach was to like Reacher less than you're going to like him. And the two things are connected. If I remain critical of Reacher, if I keep him at a distance, then the reader is going to like him all the more because there's an authenticity there. There is a wholeness of the approach. He's warts and all. He's got the bad points. I'm not afraid of showing those. And to me, that was a big part of the success of the series. I do not protect him. I do not keep him close. So that because he was slightly distant to me, I was able to let him go pretty easily, to be honest, because I'd never really classed him that close. I foresaw, Andrew and I work differently in the sense that Andrew is slightly more of a planner than I am. I'm a zero planner, no outline, no idea at all where the book is going to go. Andrew likes to have a slightly better view into the future. So I thought I'll be at a loss with that because, if he says to me, what happens next? I'm going to say, I don't know. No clue.
Just write and see what happens.
But then that in the event that really didn't matter, because what I especially wanted to happen was subtly and without making a big deal out of it, I wanted Reacher to be somewhat rebooted into at least yesterday, if not today. Because Reacher, the way I was writing him, because of who I am and my age and my experience, he was super Luddite. He had no idea about anything technological. He was all fingers and thumbs, even with a cell phone, which was cool for a while, but I was aware that it was getting a little tired, that thing. So I wanted to have the series somewhat rebooted, Reacher somewhat subtly rejuvenated, more energy, slightly more in the current day. So that when it came to the things that needed the planning and looking ahead, I was totally happy for Andrew to do that himself because that was the whole point of doing it. And ironically, my only real fear about this whole thing is kind of coming true, which is that I thought, God, suppose they like his books better than mine. And, this book, The Sentinel, it's a great book in my opinion. And the reviews it's getting are incredibly encouraging and reassuring for the publisher. The reviews are basically saying the transition is smooth. It's really hasn't changed at all. It's just as good as it ever was.
Nice.
And I'm thinking, damn, really?
I wasn't that special.
Andrew, you hear that, by the way?
I think that's a kind of, that's a common trait amongst writers, isn't it? Because, if you yourself, if you're a writer, you go to the bookstore, right? And you look for your books. And there's only two possibilities, right? Either they have them or they don't. So if they don't have them, you're mad because they haven't got your books. Why haven't they got them? And if they have got lots of your books, then you're upset because they're not selling. So,
Never happy.
No win.
It's like when I wanted to quit my job to write. I decided to do this, and I was working for this huge telephone company, and all of the other divisions, apart from the one I was working for, they were paying people to leave. So I was thinking to myself, okay, so there's two options here. You either get paid to work, or you get paid not to work. So I thought, well, I know which one I want. But of course, my division was the only one that they weren't giving out these payments to leave. So I campaigned for 2 or 3 years trying to get out of that company, and then. And it was great, actually. I had the time of my life because up until that point, I'd tried quite hard. I'd been quite conscientious, and I got nowhere. And then once I decided to leave, I just thought, well, screw it then. I'll just, I'll make a nuisance of myself, and eventually they'll see the error of their ways, and they'll give me the money, and I'll go. Yeah. So, the top brass would come down for meetings because there was some big problem, and I would just come up with the stupidest idea I could possibly think of and suggest it. And then, all of these top management guys, they were like, this guy thinks outside the box. He's great.
Oh,
so
brilliant.
Yeah, I even got stock options, would you believe? And then after a little while, the division started to do extremely badly, probably because of all these stupid ideas of mine. So then finally they said, okay, you can go, we'll pay you to leave. So, but you had to apply. It was open to everybody. So I applied. And they just said, yeah, fine, you can go, leave your car keys, see ya. And then at that point, I'm like, wait, aren't you going to say, Andrew, you've devoted 15 years of your life to our company. We can't. But, I thought they should put up at least a little bit of resistance.
Yeah.
No.
That's called the Peter principle, right? You rose your own.
It was one of that.
I would hear about it, obviously, and I loved it. It could have been a movie by itself. You would deliberately come up with the stupidest idea, and there would be this kind of second of silence, and the bosses would say, great idea.
There's a movie called Office Space. It's a real similar principle. That's what it reminded me of when he was talking about it.
Well, hey, there's always something to learn about each book that you write. And now The Sentinel is your first, collaboration, And so I wanted to start with you, Lee. What did you learn in writing The Sentinel with your brother that maybe was unique or maybe something a little different than normal?
Really where it went after the opening. I mean, the opening is pretty much what I would have done probably by myself. It opens with a view of the victim, and then very quickly we're on to Reacher, who Andrew and I both love the James Bond stories, especially the movies, which really go right back to, Ovid's story of Theseus, that legend where all of those stories open with a dramatic but completely unrelated incident. And so we move from the victim to the first side of Reacher, who is dispensing justice against the bar owner who won't pay the musicians.
Nice.
And, literally that is what I would have written, because at the time I was making an album with some musicians, and I was totally into the whole musicians thing, and it's very insecure for them, and not getting paid is a huge problem, and so on. So having done that, then it was a question, all right, where next? And left to, if I was doing it by myself, I don't know what I would have done or how I would have advanced it at all. But Andrew had this idea that is, not ripped from the headlines necessarily, but current, about cyber crimes, which are obviously a big deal now, something that people know and are interested in, but really kind of beyond what I could figure out. And so at that point, the momentum of the book became his. And so what I learned was just watching another mind work. The character was set in stone. The small town atmosphere is set in stone. All the externalities of a Reacher book are there. But the actual current, the flow of the book is something that was beyond my capability of doing. And so it was really like riding a raft down a river that was foreign to me. And so, what I learned was just watching how a plot can evolve and develop in a way that I couldn't have done it myself. And all the way through, I was just thinking, this is really working. This is what I wanted. This is exactly what I said. It's Reacher somewhat rebooted, somewhat rejuvenated, somewhat re-energized, and brought up toward a realistic view of the modern world. Whereas, had I done it myself, I don't know what the story would have been, because I literally don't. But it was exactly what I wanted. It was something that was more current. It was more relatable, and the externalities were, because let's face it, it's a cybercrime, but Reacher's not going to scold these people and take them to the police station.
Right.
He's going to sort them out in his usual fashion. So it was exactly what I wanted. Both things in one: the real, authentic Reacher, but with a proper 21st century plot.
Nice. Andrew, let's toss it to you. What did you learn this first go around here?
Well, I think for me, it would have to be to do with the writing process, because as Lee was saying, he very much he will just respond, at the end of each scene, he'll decide what happens in the next scene and then the next scene, rather than plotting it out too far in advance. And in the past, I'd found it quite good to be looking a little further ahead and thinking in general terms where the story was going. And I did try to do that to some extent with the Sentinel, but there were at least two times when I thought, okay, I can see that we're going to go from A to B to C to D to E, and I had a whole sequence plotted out, and I'd actually done quite a lot of work on fleshing some of it out. But then when it came down to it, for some reason, that just doesn't work when you're writing a Reacher book. You just can't plan it in that way, because Reacher himself is, in a way, he's predictable, but in another way, he's unpredictable. And that unpredictability kept making it that I realized that spending too much time looking too far ahead was just futile, because Reacher went where he wanted. He didn't go where he didn't follow the trail of breadcrumbs in the way that I'd expected him to. So I think what I learned was just to, certainly I don't know how this would apply if I wrote any other kind of books, but certainly for Reacher, just to not waste the time or the energy trying to force Reacher to go where he doesn't want to go.
Yeah, you can't do that anyway. That's the thing about Reacher. If he wants to turn left, are you going to tell him not to?
Break your arm.
Not me.
I think that spontaneity comes through in the reading. I mean, I really do. I think that the reason he's unpredictable to me is because apparently he's unpredictable to you. And I think that really comes through when you're reading his story.
Yeah, that was always the case. And at book events, you would always get some grumpy people, and they would say, "Oh, I spotted it after 50 pages."
Sure, yeah.
And I'm like, "Really? Because I didn't."
So my younger brother is also my best friend. He's 7 years younger than me. Incidentally, he just got married this past weekend. So, hey, congrats to Joe and Gracia.
Yeah, Joey.
But we've been a sounding board for each other's creative endeavors for years, and we've collaborated on a few songs, actually. Can you describe the working dynamic between you guys as brothers? Okay, you're different writers, and we touched a little bit on that. And you can still expand upon that, by the way. But I want to hear, how did your brother relationship affect this process?
It was really fine because, you know, the brother thing, between us, altogether there were four of us. Really, there were three of us, of which I was the middle one of three. And then Andrew came along, and I'm pretty sure that my parents will have admitted it at some point. Andrew was a mistake, you know. Like,
Me too, Andrew.
There it is, dude.
A late in life mistake. And he was so much younger than the rest of us that there wasn't really that brother thing that I had with the other two, you know, the rivalry, the hatred, the fighting, all that kind of stuff. I didn't have that at all because, you know, by the time he was a sentient little boy, I was already a college student and left home and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So our relationship was completely different than most brothers. And, you know, we're going to have to diverge and have a sidebar here about the family, because my family was awful. It was, you know, narrow, repressed, gray, respectable kind of atmosphere, a very British thing.
Yeah.
The immense step up from lower middle class to middle class. That's what they wanted to do. And everything was devoted to you know, respectability and what will the neighbors think and all of that kind of thing. So I had a completely miserable childhood. I felt completely alone. My other two brothers were similar to my parents. It was really bad, to the point where I genuinely believed for many years that I must have been mixed up at the hospital. And, you know, I could not belong to these people. But then, you know, Andrew was born, and as he developed in his personality, I thought, oh my God, yeah, you know, there are genetics involved here, because he and I were so similar, even from the start. And he talks about being stubborn and obstinate, and that's for damn sure. I remember one of the earliest things that I remember is my parents and him were on a family vacation. The rest of us were gone. And I was traveling back from Paris or something. So I stopped by where they were taking their vacation just to visit for a day. And it was at the seaside in Britain. And my mother was worried about him getting sunburned, you know, which shows how crazy she was, because we're talking about Britain. So there wasn't really much practical danger of him getting sunburned. But, and he was off playing in the sand somewhere, and she said to me, would you go put this T-shirt on the baby, she said. So I walked over with the T-shirt and said, I've got to put this on you. And he snatched it from me and said, I'll do it myself, which was absolutely normal. And although there was this big disparity in age, we became kind of allies in a way. I mean, I was very aware that, oh my God, the poor kid is going to have to endure what I endured. So I tried to be as, you know, a friend and an ally, and in a way, I suppose, not really a defender, because I wasn't there enough to do anything about it, but I wanted to suggest things to him and reinforce things with him just so that he wouldn't be brought down by it all. And it really did turn us into a pair of allies, even though we were far apart in age. And that's how it was. So there was none of that sibling stuff where we lived under the same roof and fought and squabbled. That never happened. We just grew up to be friends. And there was a slight delicacy, I know, on Andrew's part, that he was younger and he didn't want to be impolite to me as the older person. But I do remember, and you know, typical, it's like what happened with this Reacher book, that I remember once my wife wanted a new laptop, And so I got one, and I was trying to transfer all her files over and all of that, which I couldn't do very well. And Andrew happened to be visiting, and he connected it all up, and they started appearing. And at one point I said, why did that one come in ahead of the other one? And he looked at me and said, possibly it's alphabetical order. And, that was kind of the first time that we'd ever sort of bumped up against each other in a way that showed he now had the confidence to shut me up. And, it's just been a great relationship. It's been, you talk about best friend and so on, but you've got to go down a level. If I needed an unregistered handgun, $1,000 and a trip to the border, it would be Andrew that I called. If I was in a spy movie and I could smuggle out by text, let's say, if I could smuggle out one cryptic word that would solve my problem, and I would rely on somebody who A, could understand what I was talking about, and B, do something about it, again, I would text Andrew. And so, we grew up with that kind of solidarity. And so there's been very little friction, really, very little. There are still some things I can do better than him, like electrics. If he wants a light put up or something, I'll come and do it, because I don't want to see him blow himself up. But, it's really the boot is on the other foot. And that's always interesting in life when it's the same with my daughter. She teaches me all kinds of things and does things for me all the time. Like yesterday, I wanted to get some photos on my iPad. I couldn't work out. And she was like, oh, Dad. And, she does it in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Andrew, what about your perspective as being the younger brother who is now on equal footing?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the strangest part of the thing for me, because as I mentioned, being younger, I mean, I've got a sort of a constant sense that I'm always having to rush to catch up, and I think that's because when I was little, the others were always bigger than me, faster than me, they knew more than me, they knew how to do more things than me. So I was always sort of desperately trying to rush to catch up with them, or not to be left behind. And so it was just really internalized that being younger was a disadvantage, was a weakness, really. And so that was one of the things that sort of dawned on me when Lee floated the idea of passing the baton. I was thinking, wow, for the first time in my life, being younger is actually working in my favor here. This is, it took me a little while to get used to it, because it was the opposite of what I was used to. But other than that, everything you said, I see it exactly the same way. I remember an incident, I must have been maybe 4 or 5 years old. I'd done something that had, outraged our father. He was furious with me. He was in a rage, and Lee was visiting, and he actually stood up for me. That was the first, no one ever stood up for me, because as he was saying, he'd left home for college by that point. So I was taken aback. I was blown away. So, I said, thank you. And he said, no, don't thank me. What we'll do from now on is I'll stand up for you. You stand up for me. And that was many, many decades ago. And it's something, from that day forth, we always did. And, he talks about kind of looking at me being younger and following in his footsteps through the family, and the kind of dire sort of drudgery of that atmosphere. And, when I was young, I didn't understand that perspective. But then as I got older and thought about it, I realized, I'm just repeating what's already been done. So It was great to be able to call him and say, you'll never believe what they've done. He'd be like, oh,
he's like, oh, yes, I can.
Let me tell you a story or two.
Yeah. And then when he got to be, a young teenager, he would come up and stay with us on his own. And that was just a blast.
Yeah.
That was just hilarious, because by that, if he was 14, I'd be in my late 20s, and we had a kid at that point. And so it was really it was just a great family feeling. We had a totally good time. And I started to really crave that, you know, I wish we could have done more of that. But now, of course, we do it all the time, basically. We've ended up living close together, which was a sort of surprise, because who would have thought it? You know, we're both from Birmingham, England, and we live in Wyoming, USA.
The least populated state.
There might be a question later about that.
Yeah, don't say anymore.
There are some large cultural differences in the world, but that is probably one of the biggest.
That's so true.
You know, what a blast it's been. Who would have thought it?
Yeah.
Going back to writing for a little bit, Lee, you alluded that some writers actually fall in love with their characters, that, you know, they identify with them, they even incorporate some of their own traits into them. And you know, I don't even know if some of your readers don't realize that, although you don't necessarily hate Reacher, you don't like him very much, as you said before. But Andrew, I want to ask you, do you share that same aversion to the aspect of the character?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And I think maybe some of the aversion comes from the experience of writing about him, because I certainly never really felt any aversion to him at all when I was just another Reacher fan. I just, you know, I enjoyed the exploits. I enjoyed thinking along with him. I enjoyed the way that he would annihilate all of his enemies, you know, all of the kind of wish fulfillment stuff when you're stuck in a boring, tedious job and you just wish you could, you know, rip the boss's head off, you know. At that point, you want to be Reacher. But then when you start writing about him, I think that's where that appreciation comes in, and that's where that awareness of not being too close. And actually, you know, you asked about whether there was any sort of conflict or tension between us, and really there wasn't. But where during the editorial process, the only times really anything chafed a little was there were certain times where a couple of things that I described Reacher doing, I described his appearance, I described how other people responded to him, and you know, the editors were sort of saying, well, wait a minute, you know, you said he looked like a Neanderthal. You said that the guy in Nashville, the insurance guy who was gonna give him a ride to the town where all the action ended up happening. You know, he was sort of recoiling from Reacher, and I was saying, well, yeah, because that's what Reacher is. You know?
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I had that problem all the time. And you know, it's not true to say I hate Reacher or I don't like him. I mean, that's an exaggeration.
Yeah, I know.
What I try to keep him at arm's length in order to preserve the quality of the character. But you know, those things get so misreported. You know, I saw that. I said that in some interview, and I saw the headline saying I hate Reacher. It's not that at all. But you know, that's the media for you. I once did an interview in the U.S. where the journalist, it was a U.S. paper in the U.S. journalist said, are you happy that you came to live in the U.S.? So I said, you know, what was I going to say at that point? A, the truth, and B, we're talking to American media. So I said, of course, you know, I'm delighted to be here in America. And the next question was, do you miss anything about Britain? And I said, no, not really. And that was picked up on the wires and published in a British newspaper under the headline, "Popular Author Hates Britain." You know, so you can't win. But it's all about keeping the character honest is what it is. And I had years of that. And I had a sort of stock phrase usually, because editors and publishing people as a whole are so lovely and so sweet. And, you know, they really are the last nicest people in the world. It's the last nice business in the world. And they're delightful people. And they would say, you know, Reacher would do something like break somebody's finger just for the fun of it, if they're an unpleasant guy. And they were all wincing and saying, does he have to do that? And I say, yeah, you've got to remember, Reacher is a bastard. And I must have said that 1,000 times over the years.
Yeah. Lee, arguably the most commented aspect of the previous film adaptations was about the wildly different physical attributes between the on-screen and the written Reacher character. And so now there's a lot of buzz in the upcoming Amazon TV series and Alan Richardson's casting, who appears about the same size as Reacher as you envisioned him. Do you share in the fans' excitement of a closer physical portrayal?
Yeah, I really do. And I made one mistake about with the Tom Cruise casting, which was that in my head, the book was the book and the movie was the movie, which was a completely distant, separate, lateral thing. It's a bit like if you're, which has happened to me a couple of times, you're having dinner or something, and the next table they're talking about Reacher and giving their opinions about what he's like. And to me, that's what the movie was. It was somebody else's opinion. I didn't see how it could possibly detract from the books, because a movie does not change the books. That old question, what is Hollywood going to do to my book? Of course, they do nothing to your book. Your book is always there on the shelf, just like it always was, and the words in it do not change. And so I completely underestimated the reaction of the readers. I thought they would say, yeah, not in love with Cruise's portrayal, but then they would calm down after that statement. But they didn't. They somehow transferred their dislike of the Cruise portrayal to the books, and they became hostile to the whole thing and aggravated by the whole thing. So it was a mistake to imagine that there could be separation between the book and the movie. So I was determined this time, obviously, not to repeat the same same mistake. So it was a question of finding exactly the right guy, which was a fairly tight specification, to be honest. Because there are practicalities to be involved, especially with television, which is really not at all star-driven in the way that feature films are.
Right.
I thought we have a much wider choice, and we need to find exactly the right guy. But in terms of practicality, can we afford him? Will he sign up for 5 years or whatever? And so it ended up quite a tight specification, but we took our time. I mean, the virus thing didn't help. It was very weird doing casting by Zoom. But we really went through everybody, and I felt Alan was the perfect guy. I mean, he's I'm not about to say this to his face, but he's slightly not good looking. He is, he's big and
gritty.
Yeah, he's not. The thing about Reacher is that when he steps in the door, the temperature of the room drops a degree and everybody's a little nervous for 5 seconds. Yeah. And Tom, for all his great qualities as an actor, and he's a terrific guy. I mean, we had a lot of fun. He's a good friend and a super guy. Yeah. We had endless fun, and I will always be happy that I worked with him. But when he stepped in the door, the temperature did not drop a degree, and nobody was nervous. And so it just didn't relate. And a lot of the story depends on that hugeness. In the first movie, there's a scene where the detective goes to a motel and asks the clerk, he said, I'm looking for a guy who conceivably could kill someone with a single blow. And the clerk says, room 10. Yeah, it doesn't quite work for Cruise. Whereas it will totally work for Richardson, who looks like he could. And, we've talked, shooting is not starting anytime soon because of the pandemic, but we've talked about it. And what he's got is this, he's a brute, he's a savage, but he's also capable of having that peculiar kind of courtesy and politeness that an ex-military officer has. And that's exactly what we need for Reacher. That peculiar kind of West Point courtesy and politeness, prefacing a single blow that will, like, in fact, kill you.
Yeah.
As the resident reacher guy, I think I have to weigh in here. So I'm 6'5" and 250. So the moment I read Reacher, I was like, "Hey, finally, I have I have somebody that."
Wait, I identified with Tom Cruise though, Sean.
Yeah, I know you did. I know you did. No, but I was able to separate the movie from the book, but in a way that I literally didn't associate them at all, because otherwise it would have driven me nuts. But not because it was Tom Cruise. Because the one thing that you did that I've never seen an author do this to this extent is you made a physical description a character trait. Reacher, I think everything in Reacher, his worldview, his confidence, everything flows from that size. And I think that like as a reader, that's what like got into my soul a little bit. Like I was reading it and I was like, man, this isn't a physical description. It's a character trait. And that's hard to do. So,
yeah, thank you.
So for me, that was the linchpin, I think.
That is, you know, something that I tried to do both for myself and for the reader, that whoever you are, you know, you're walking down the street at 5 a.m. and you see some dodgy guy coming towards you, you're a little bit worried, whoever you are. Yeah. And I just thought, suppose you weren't. Suppose you didn't care who was walking down. You didn't care how many dodgy looking guys are walking down the street. How good would that feel? And in a way, that's something Andrew and I share. You know, we're both big.
Yeah.
And I will never forget one particular time where one of our other brothers got in an accident. And so the whole family kind of gathered at the hospital. And Andrew and I took a 5-minute break. I probably wanted a cigarette or something. So we were standing on the steps outside the hospital side by side. And coming up the steps towards us was the doctor who was treating our brother. And I remember, I think it was Andrew who said to him, look after David, we're his brothers. And this guy nearly died.
I know what those conversations are like on the other end, believe me.
Yeah.
That's great.
You know, listening to what you're saying about the casting, you know, it's as if what you were doing was looking for that actor equivalent of, you know, remember the band Motorhead? Remember when they were
funny? Yeah.
You know, the bass player had been in Hawkwind previously and had been their roadie and everything, and they, you know, he basically got kicked out, and so he started his own band. And I saw a really early interview with him where he was asked what the band was going to be like, and his answer was, well, put it this way, if we moved in next door to you, your lawn would die. And
that's a great line.
That's awesome.
But I think really, you know, everybody homes in on the size issue with Tom Cruise. But I think really there's the real fundamental problem was that a movie is just not a very good vehicle for a Reacher story, because everybody thinks about the fights. You know, they think about, you know, Reacher's enormous physical dominance and how that translates into the fighting. But actually, if you step back and look at how the stories work, there's an enormous amount of Reacher explaining his thought process. You know, he'll look at a situation and think, well, it could work like this, or it could work like that, but actually it's something completely different. And, you know, there's a great joy in reading that, because you're thinking along with him, and you're following and you're seeing his logic, and you admire the conclusions that he reaches. And those take their proper amount of time to unfold in the book. But in a movie, you just don't have the time to do that. So what instead happens is Reacher in the movies was jumping from the question to the answer just too quickly. It took the fun out of it, and it almost, you know, it made it incredible. It made it unbelievable. And I think for me, that was the least enjoyable part of seeing the books translated into the movies. Obviously, there's a lot of the normal stuff that happens, like characters becoming amalgamated and certain subplots being cut and whatever. But the least enjoyable part was, you know, knowing the book so well, you'd think, oh, great, you know, he's going to go through these 6 steps and get to this stunning conclusion. It was as if, oh, look, there's the answer, you know. And You know, you got this, but you didn't get the, you know, the delivery. So
Yeah.
I think that the TV is just going to be a far more suitable medium for the way the story.
It will be, and also, you know, and this is something else that Andrew understood from the very beginning, is that the pace in a Reacher book is by no means uniform, because I absolutely believe that if you have uniform, relentless high pace, that's the same thing as having no pace at all. And there's a lot of variation in the Reacher book. There are quiet passages, contemplative passages, where the pace goes up and down for long periods. And that's, you know, Andrew was really good at writing that, but also television is going to be really good at showing that, because, you know, obviously if you've got 12 hours to tell a story, it's going to be different than if you've got 90 minutes. And so it's going to be far truer to the actual book, which is really, I'm just looking forward to having the time and the patience to spin it out in the way it is in the book. Plus, you know, as an insider thing, doing the movies is, you're constantly oppressed by the rating. You know, is it PG or is it R? Which is a huge leap. You know, going to an R-rated movie destroys the size of the audience. So everything is about, can we get away with this on PG? Literally everything. You know, Reacher hits somebody in the face. If there's a ½ inch of blood coming out of the guy's nose, we're fine. If it's 3/4 of an inch, no. Every single thing is dominated by those externalities. Wow. Whereas streaming television obviously has no rating, and you can do what you like. And I'm not saying we're going to turn it into a bloodbath necessarily, but it will completely take away that pressure of constantly checking yourself. You just do the scene like it should be done, and you're okay.
Our interview with Lee Child and Andrew Child was so fantastic and so extensive that it's now a two-parter. So we will see you later this week with part 2.